Hey, Ray Del Vecchio here from websiteprofitcourse.com, and I want to go through the top 5 Photoshop tips for web designers. These are the things that I use most often with Photoshop, so let's jump right into them. Number 1 is all about image resizing. So this is my favorite thing to do. It saves the most space when it comes to cutting down your file size. That way, when you upload these to your website, it's not taking up all your hosting space and eating up bandwidth when people load the page. And that's the image processor. So you can get to that from File, Scripts, Image Processor. And if you click on that, it's going to bring up this dialog. You can either resize every one of your open images, so all the ones that are open up here, or you can set it to a folder, and it'll go through all the images in a folder and then send them to a second folder, dropping them down from, say, maybe 5,000 to 6,000 pixels to whatever size you set here. And I have a whole video going through this, which I'll link up in the top right. Now, if you want to go through this manually and just resize one photo, you can export them. So I'm used to using the Save for Web menu, but you can also use the newer one, which is just the Export As. Both of these pretty much do the same thing. And this is where you can set your format. So I have an entire video going through why you would choose any of these formats if you're unfamiliar with them. I'm sure you've heard of them, but maybe you don't know which one is best for what type of photo. I'll link up that video in the top right, but you could pick your format, choose the quality. So obviously the lower the quality with the JPEG, you're going to save on file space. It's going to be a smaller file. And then you can drop down the image size and then just export it. Now we're going to get into more of the cooler features. So for number 2, let's talk about image editing. So I got a couple open images here that we're going to test out all of these features with. I'm going to bring up just a stock photo to do some of these image editing things. So when you open up an image, sometimes this layer will be locked. If you don't know anything about Photoshop, pretty much every template has different layers. So in order to unlock it, all you got to do is double click and it's going to bring up this new layer menu. Just hit OK, and now you can start editing this layer. Now to quickly adjust the color and the light level, you can bring up the levels menu. So to do that, hit Control L, and that's going to bring up your levels. You can see here you got the channel RGB, which is everything. If you want to adjust one of these individually, red, green, or blue, you can do that. But all you got to do really is just drag and drop these sliders here, and you'll see how it adjusts the color. So this is just a really simple, quick fix if you need to adjust the lighting level. Now, if you want to go a little bit more in depth, you have these adjustments up here within the adjustments panel. And with Photoshop, if you don't see this tab up here, go to Window, and this is where you can enable the various panels that have all the features that you can edit your photo with. Within the adjustments panel, they give you access to brightness and contrast, the levels, which we just did, curves, which that's a little bit more complicated. I don't use that very often. Exposure, which is similar to brightness and contrast. Vibrance, which gives you saturation. And then you have a handful of others here. So let's just add a couple of these. And it's important to note that when you add this adjustment here, it's going to apply to every layer below it. And we can adjust the brightness here with this slider. You can adjust the contrast. And they do have an auto button. Sometimes I don't like the way this turns out. You can see that kind of made it a little bit darker, but it is richer colors. And then if we want to add a second one here, let's do the vibrance. So you can see this is almost going to get like comically bright if we turn both of the vibrance and the saturation up to 100. You can also hide these effects without deleting them by hitting this little button here, the I button on the left. And then if you do want to delete them, just drag it to the trash can down here. And then the last thing that I want to show you with this is the layer styles. So if you double click on one of the layers, it'll bring up this dialog menu where you have all these options to add a color overlay, satin, which this is kind of like a pattern. I don't really use that very often, but the ones that I use are color overlay, gradient overlay. I'll use the drop shadow pretty often on text layers, and then stroke, which is basically just putting an outline around a layer. The third thing that I want to dig into is fixing glitches on a photo. So there's a handful of ways that you can do this very easily. The one that I like the most is called the Content Aware Fill. If we zoom in here, now here's another little tip. Once you zoom in, if you press and hold the space bar, it's going to bring up this hand icon, and you can drag the photo around. On this image here, we have this little antenna on the house. So I'm going to select this, and I'm going to dig into the different ways that you can select a little bit later in this video, so hang on for that. I'm just going to select this area here. We're going to do the Content Aware Fill. You can bring that up by hitting Shift F5. So let's do it and see what it looks like. Doesn't always work perfectly. Sometimes this works best when you have a tighter selection, and I'm selecting a lot of blue sky here, so let's see what it looks like. it did get rid of it, but you can see it also kind of got rid of the clouds. So if we take away that marquee, it looks pretty good. And the next one is the clone stamp tool. We can bring that up by hitting S. That's the little icon over here. One thing I like about Photoshop here is when you hover over it, it'll give you a little intro on how the tool works. So it's giving you a little video showing you how to use the clone stamp tool. You can select an area to clone. So they were doing an image with cherries. With this one, we can do a cloud. You can see we have the circle brush. And if we hit the Alt button, that's going to tell us where we want to clone from. So I'm going to hit the Alt button and click this cloud. And then I'm going to start drawing over here. And you can see once we do that, it grabs our clone and we start drawing that entire section. And you probably could touch it up a little bit so it didn't look identical to that. And then the last one is the spot healing brush. So this is normally best for faces. Like say you have, a picture of somebody and there's a huge pimple on their face. You can edit that out with the spot healing brush. We can bring that up by hitting J. And that's the little Band-Aid icon up here. You can see on here, though, it does work on other types of images. So let's see what happens when we hit this on the antenna. And we'll use the spot healing brush. And that also gets rid of it pretty nicely. I mean, that actually works really well, probably even better than the content-aware fill. So those are the three features that I use most often to get rid of little weird things in images like that. Next up, let's talk about how to select things. So this is how you can select different areas of what you're looking at or the various layers. The first one is the marquee tool, and that's the dashed line up here. You can get to that by hitting M. And right now this is set to rectangular. If you click and you hold any of these options that have a little arrow here, there's more ways to customize this specific tool. So you can do elliptical marquee. They also have single row and single column. We just click and drag an area to do this. And if we hit the shift button, that's going to keep our proportions so we're selecting a square area. The same goes with the elliptical tool. To deselect an area, you hit Control D. That'll erase your selection completely. Now, let's say you just want to select a layer here. I have this image, which is just the state of Pennsylvania and New Jersey by county. So if I enable one of these, you'll see how it lights up. If we want to select that specific layer, you can hover over this little thumbnail here. And if you hit Control and then click it, it's going to select that layer on the screen. Another way that you can select an area like that is by using the magic wand tool. And we can get to this by hitting the W button. And this just smartly selects an area. So let me try and do it on a regular image like this. So I'm hitting it here. It's almost impossible to see because it's not selecting anything. And that's because the tolerance is at 0. And I can set this anywhere between 0 and 100. So let's do 50% tolerance and see what that selects. And now it's selecting almost the entire sky. So this is a really easy way to select complicated areas instead of having to draw it out and manually do it. Lastly, you have the lasso tool, which is the L shortcut. By default, it's set to the polygonal lasso, so that's just going to draw straight lines. You have the regular lasso tool, so that's just freeform drawing your selection area. The polygonal one is doing straight lines like this. When you complete the area, you'll see this little circle icon pop up. And then it's going to give us our selection. And then the last one is the magnetic lasso tool. And kind of like the magic wand, that's looking for these borders. So if I zoom in here and just try and go along the house, you'll see how it pretty much sticks to it. Obviously, this isn't perfect right now. And this is another thing where you can kind of adjust the settings to get it to stick a little bit nicer. And then if you ever want to manually do it, you just hit the click and then it'll add that point for you. So usually you want to do that at like a corner point like that. And then you can draw your own corners. So this is another pretty cool tool. And then we just need to go up here to select the starting point. That way we get our selection area. And you can do whatever you want with that. So I'd say that's about 80% of what I do in Photoshop. It's important to know that I'm probably using like 0.1% of what Photoshop is capable of. It's so powerful. But these get you by with, basic web images that you would need for a website or a web design. Let me just show you one other file I have open here. And this is using just a few of these features. You can see I got a screenshot of a Google map in the background. I have a color overlay on top of that. And then we have text with a drop shadow. And if you look on the right here, we can see all of our effects. You can manually enable and disable either all the effects or individual ones if you want to see how it looks with and without. In general, I'm a minimalist and I want to spend as little time on design as possible, but I do want it to look very nice and be clear and effective. The last thing that I want to share is a few of my favorite resources. Really, my two favorite sites are pexels.com You can go through them here and either search or browse their images. They're great to work with, and they're 100% free, which is awesome. And the last one is Icon Finder. And we can look at the categories or use some of the popular searches down here. So let me just click arrow and you'll see all the various ones. And they usually put paid icons up at the top. If we scroll down, they'll have free ones, and you can filter them on the left. So normally what I like to do is filter free and then make sure that the license is no link back. The cool thing about these is they give you all these sizes, but they also give you SVG, which is a scalable vector format, which you can use in Photoshop or Illustrator. So those are my two go-to sites. That's all I got for this video. I hope you learned a thing or two if you're a new Photoshop user. And if you are a web designer, you want to see other tools that I use to build and manage client websites, you can download a free giveaway that I got on my homepage. Go to websiteprofitcourse.com to download that. Or if you like to see the client questionnaire that I normally like to send to my clients, you can download that from websiteprofitcourse.com/questions. Both of those links and other helpful links will be in the description below. Last but not least, make sure you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. If you got any Photoshop tips, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. I'm also interested in how you build your websites. If you know nothing about me and you're just stumbling on this video, I use WordPress to build all my websites. If you use some other platform, I'd love to hear it below. And I'll link up a couple other videos here if you'd like to keep on learning. Thanks and have a great day.